Уважаемые гости, просим вас занять места в зале. Уважаемые гости, просим вас занять места в зале.
Distinguished guests, you are kindly requested to take your seats.
Раз. Ага. Добрый день.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Moscow Financial Forum. So we have quite a number of rich and famous people around. So as for us, we could have no idea about the finances. But now it's a kind of a new epoch when there is a much greater understanding of the world financial system, but we have to provide some other type of explanation. So I would like to introduce the panelists, Andrei Kostin. I mean, on the basis of a geographical principle. So, President of the VTB, Anton Silvanov, Minister of Finances, or the Vice Premier. So we shall speak both in terms of budget and macroeconomic and the World Bank. Alexei Kudrin, the head of the clearinghouse. So it's an unusual word combination. And the candidate of Fine Arts, and Maxim Oreshkin, Minister of Economic Development. And we have one more very special guest. The chairman of the government of the Russian Federation, Dmitry Anatolievich Medvedev.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I heartily welcome you all at the Moscow Financial Forum. It takes place for the third time this year, and gradually it's turning into a credible platform for the exchange of opinions in the area of finance and the economy in general. It's a good tradition for the forum to take place at this time, ahead of the Moscow's birthday. Such timing gives the opportunity not only to discuss serious financial topics, but to feel the celebratory atmosphere in Moscow. Just recently we welcomed football fans here, and I guess that many of you have followed the World Cup and saw how Moscow welcomed its guests. We would be glad if such an atmosphere would be observed here at the forum when it comes to finance. Although when it comes to finances, it's much more complicated when with football. This forum is financial, but the topic of the plenary session is broader, and this is justified because modern challenges are related not only to the movement of money, but also to the economy in general, which is being influenced by the changes in global policy and trade, as well as the condition of the markets and international competition, and those changes are not always positive. It is in these conditions that we are to put Russia into the top 5 of major economies of the world. This goal has been set by the May decree of the President of the Russian Federation. And our financial, tax and budget policy should provide us means to reach this end. Over the recent years, we have come up with a sound basis for further development, despite the economic pressure, despite the sanctions, despite the crisis which shake up the global economy. It's been the case from 2008. We've managed to observe growth in the economy, and although the rate is not high, we see that our development is not accompanied by the accumulation of disbalances and external vulnerabilities, as was the case before. Another minimum is observed when it comes to foreign debt. Our industry is becoming more competitive, and in a number of areas we see import substitution, and non-commodities export is also growing, including through the strengthening of financial sector. Now, Russian jurisdiction is more in line with the interests and demands of business. I know that there are a lot of complaints still, but regardless of that, we see a more developed jurisdiction, and the financial markets have now obtained the key infrastructure of the one general mega regulator on the basis of the Bank of Russia and the Central Depository. Now we have protected market from any sort of manipulation through the access of the insider information. We have the relevant law in place, and we are developing mechanisms for the protection of money, including in mortgaged deals. And we've also lowered taxes for new businesses, for example, taxes for special areas and projects, for example, PSEDA, the SPIC regime, and others. We've moved on to the principle of one-stop-shop window for accounting. We are supporting the development of small and medium enterprises, and this has allowed us to hold stronger positions in the doing business rating. We are now ranked 35th. This is an indicator which shows us whether we are moving into the right directions and whether we are taking the right decisions. We need to move further, and we are developing the key strategies for the government activities until 2024. They have all the tactical and strategic steps, including in achieving the national goals set out in the May decree, but the scope is broader. This is stable development with low inflation and growing income of the population. The economy is now being transformed into a more non-commodity mode, and we are supporting innovation and digital technologies, as well as high-tech production and other areas. I would dwell on a few moments which are of crucial importance. First, we are going to stimulate investment inflows. Just recently, we've adopted a plan of action to boost investment, and we want to reach a level of 25% of the GDP per year, and currently it stands at 21%. We will also seek to further strengthen the investment climate and to cut business expenses, to broaden the use of best practices in the regions of Russia, as well as strengthening the procedures of control and monitoring and decriminalization of certain offenses on the part of business. We are also creating additional conditions in order to return capitals from abroad. We've come up with special administrative areas and undertaken certain decisions. For example, the Ruski Island and Oktyabrski in the Kaliningrad region, where we'll be able to bring businesses from abroad into the Russian jurisdiction while keeping their status and the corporate structure, as well as a number of advantages. We need to further boost the formation of the long money pool and to launch projects based on syndicated lending. That's why we created such a tool as the Project Finance Factory. Second, we will attract private investors to various types of projects, including infrastructure project. We recently came up with a development foundation. It's going to be financed through budgetary sources, and its budget would be stipulated by the law budget every year. And it's going to co-finance several areas of state programs. This is a major financial pool which would allow us to attract major private companies. Thus, we'll be able to support not only big businesses, but also small businesses. We are also going to broaden the number of tools of the PPP and facilitate the concessions area. We are going to involve various partners into the development institutions, for example, to carry out expertise. What projects would be launched, it's too early to talk about that. We've only accomplished to complete the first stage of the comprehensive plan for modernization and broadening of magistral infrastructure, which spans across transport and electrical energy. And one of the main criteria for selection is the attractiveness of a certain project to private investors. We are also going to involve business community and regions in implementing those projects. We will work on lowering the costs of credits. We need to create conditions for a more sustainable growth in general. We also need to shift from a neutral to stimulating regulation of this area. And despite all our successes in containing the inflation rate, the rates are still quite elevated. So we count on a more active position of the Bank of Russia. My third point is taxes. We will continue to create stable and predictable tax conditions, which would allow us to respect the parity of citizens, business, and the state. And this was the logic we were guided by when we transformed our tax system. We understood that we have major goals ahead of us, and this translates into major expenses. But at the same time, we wanted to minimize the influence of our steps undertaken to the real income of our population. That's why we've raised the VAT rate while keeping up the simplified procedures. And the threshold for the VAT refund would be lowered from 7 to 2 billion rubles, and from 3 to 2 months, we've lowered the time for the in-desk audits. We've also set the accumulated tariff of insurance contributions into the state extra budgetary funds from 34% to 30%, and we've also abolished the property tax. In the upcoming 6 years, we are going to complete our tax maneuver in the oil industry. An important topic are non-tax payments, which are taxes in nature. So we want to introduce general rules for their introduction, for their amendments, and for their collection. We've discussed this topic with the representatives of business, and a special working group has been created to come up with proper approaches to this reform. We expect to see the outcome document in early spring of the next year. And we are going to prepare a draft law on including such payments into the tax code. We've discussed that for quite a long time, but we've decided that we need to include them nonetheless. The general fiscal burden in Russia is on par with the level currently adopted in the OECD countries. And I would like to highlight that the same level would remain unchanged in the coming 6 years. So we have introduced a sort of a tax moratorium, and we do not plan to make any amendments. Dear colleagues, we have major and crucial challenges ahead, and it's impossible to overcome them without your sound work, without the work of financial experts. I'm sure that we'll be able to come up with a proper response to all the challenges we are facing, including through the success of every single company where you work, those companies that you put efforts into. And the 8th of September is your professional holiday, Financial Experts Day. And it is my great pleasure to congratulate you on this holiday, all those who are present here, and of course, all those who are working on the financial market as we speak. So good luck to you, and thank you for your attention.
Well, dear friends, you know what? It's so interesting to have a look at the audience when Dmitry Anatolyevich was talking about the taxes. You don't blink that much. For the first time, you have blinked when during the phrase that the money will be transferred on your account much faster than before. Okay, save money. So, Alexander Georgievich, we are just common taxpayers, and we don't celebrate the 8th of September as the Financial Expert Day. And actually, our achievements, they are fait accompli, and suffice it to have a look at today's papers. But nevertheless, if we would like to have a look at those objectives that have been specified in the May ukaz or presidential statement. So good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. I can't but agree. So only the financial experts, this is the day of the financiers. We're dealing with the finances. We have some financial assets, and we work both with the financial assets and not only. It's a kind of a common holiday. Maybe we should call it. We should do it as a red letter day, as a national holiday after all. So we can discuss it anyway. If we enjoy support, then we shall give a green light to it. But on a serious note, so the objectives in that presidential ukaz, it's a kind of a breakthrough. What does it mean? Let's say in the area of economy and social domain. Of course, the basis, the foundation is economy. By saying breakthrough, it means a higher economic growth rates. And this will certainly increase the solvency of our citizens, higher wages, higher pensions, social benefits, and our citizens will enjoy better life and social security. But the basis, the foundations, is the economy. But speaking about the breakthrough, about higher growth rates that could be higher than average and global rates, more than 3%, for instance. How can we make it happen? It goes without saying. The heart of the matter, these are the investments. So it means that new jobs will be created, new production facilities will be set up, new quality of the economy, and naturally there will be some new investments, and there will be a better growth of the economy. Speaking about the new figures and statistics, in order to provide for 3.5% growth, we should enhance the investment as compared to GDP by 3 to 4 points, up to 25% as compared to the GDP. And in that case, we shall obtain those economic plans implemented. Where should we take these investments from? It's not just the government money or federal budget. Of course, using the budget money to increase the investment activity, we shall not go that far. And our task is to create those conditions despite the external limitations, let's say domestically. So we should develop the investment activity. The investors should not be scared or cowed by investing into new enterprises. Our citizens should not be afraid to bring their savings to the banks or create some investment accounts and open some bank accounts, investment bank accounts. And the people should not be afraid of opening new enterprises, starting new businesses, and we should not be afraid let's say, of operating on external markets. That's why this kind of general understanding means this kind of medium we're talking about. In general, such conditions are there. Low inflation rate. As such, we're well protected against internal impacts like changes in the oil prices or volatility on the financial markets, or let's say some changes in the rates of the Federal Reserve, or some commerce limitations. And despite these negative factors, so the economy is on the rise, no matter what. And this is thanks to the policy conducted by the Russian government. Sometimes it's anti-crisis or creation of some kind of a stable economic medium. And despite all the all the fluctuations, we have a stable growth. Where should we take the money for investments? So we're talking about the private savings. We're talking, and even through the government budget, we shall do our best to create conditions, proper conditions, in order to stimulate such investment. I don't mean the nationwide projects, let's say infrastructure and digital economics. So we have a national projects. So we're doing a lot in order to improve the productivity of labor, so that the people would have greater chances to create additional product and enhance their export potential. And we're just saying that we shall invest more into the social domain, like education, healthcare, so our people will enjoy longer life, will have less diseases, and they will have a higher educational status. And all this is done through the budget. So don't merely finance some businesses and create new enterprises. And so also create the development fund. And through this instrument, we shall demonstrate vividly what we spent our money for. We shall also create the second line of business, if not the third one, for further development of the financial markets. In general, our financial market is not that bad. So if compared to the emerging economies and developing countries, so we have a very good tools for the financial market. And so we can use our domestic institutes. We're using the domestic market, so we mobilize it no matter the limitations. And our task is to create, let's say, finance, so that common people would bear the hat of an investor. And there will be some investment tools around them, and we could also provide enough financial resources for the pension fund. This is also one of the components of the investment as a whole, and the stability of the income when the people retire. So now we have developed an investment plan that encompasses the whole public sector. I mean, public companies, and the companies should revisit this issue, how to improve their investment programs. Just one program, let's say the Russian railways, for 7 years makes up quite a lot of money. So that's why we mobilize all kinds of tools, both by means of macroeconomic economy and by creating conditions for the investors. During this imposed sanctions, we should create favorable, domestic conditions, both for the foreign investors and also for the domestic enterprises and population at large. So there are quite a lot of associations. I would like to sing a song, Don't Cry for Me, Argentina, or something Turkish. But nevertheless, let's have a look at the short trailer, at the short video, and then proceed. The economy of Russia. GDP per capita changes. The world and Russia. So a reduction of the oil dependency, increased stability of the input-output balance, oil prices, well-balanced budget, and the payment balance. So it has reduced down to $40 per barrel. Dependence of the ruble on oil prices. January 2017, new budget rule. Independence of ruble from oil. So external debt financing. A great flight of capital. So it has reduced the flight of capital. Oil and gas export changes in percentage. So oil and gas export is on the rise. Cost effectiveness or return on investment of the oil and gas industry. So we have a reliable basis for further development. Russia's economy. GDP per capita changes. The world, Russia. Russia is ready for a new breakthrough, for a new, leap forward. National goals of development, the economy of development, human capital, comfortable medium, environment, economy of development, contribution of the digital economy into a higher GDP, labor productivity plus 5%. So employment in the area of small and medium-sized businesses, export of non-raw commodities, the economy of development, the economy of Russia, GDP per capita changes, So Russia should belong to the first 5 leading countries in the world. National goals of development, human capital, from the economy to human capital, natural and stable population growth of Russia, so increased longevity of healthy life, so to become to the top 10 countries as to the quality of education, national goals of development, comfortable medium or environment, so improvement of housing conditions, plus 5 million families, so reduced cost of the mortgage capital credit. Moscow Financial Forum 2018. We're talking about the future. So those were the applause to the computer designer. So one of the goals that Russia should belong to the first top 5 most developed countries, because some other countries were also candidates to wear this kind of hat. But nevertheless, I will come back to some other associations, because we're talking not only conceptually and philosophically, but there was the first meeting of the Commission of the Russian Union of Entrepreneurs. But let's return to our agenda. What are the mechanisms so this would happen? I mean, Russia would belong to the top 5 countries. Well, good evening to all. My congratulations on the occasion of this holiday. The global context where just witnessing over the 5 years we have quite good economic growth rates. But now this fever is spreading around the world. Argentina and the South African Republic, Brazil. So these countries made serious mistakes in their macroeconomic development over the recent years. They have a deficit of the payment balance, and now due to the rise in the interest rates globally, so this volatility is soaring, and the situation is not that stable, and we have a deficit in the government budget, so the external debt is really not that big, and we can withstand this external volatility. So there was a graph, there was a growth rate in Russia, and what happens in the world. What we are going to witness in the world, there will be slowing down by taking our own steps, taking our own actions. We should also provide for high growth rates. So many lines of businesses and activities have been already voiced. It's the human capital, this is the investment activity, and it's a greater productivity labor. So all efforts are aimed not only to improve the quantitative indicators, but we should also increase the investment contribution at least 25%. So we do need not only the gross investment and the investment that would bring some value added cost. And the quality of the human capital would be invariably rising. Speaking about the quality of the national project that has been underway, and now it's speeding up, is the introduction of the new management structure. We're talking about different spheres, not only industry, transport, agriculture, I mean social sphere, administration, government administration, and the national projects. I mean, all these 3 lines of businesses, I'd say higher rates of the economic growth, and the dynamics behind them should be better. We should not talk much, but do. Instead, we should do much more. Well, in previous years, the So the economic development plans were elaborated. So the SSR has moved to the Gazetny side street. It's a good, but the plans were quite gigantic, I would put it this way. Maxim Stanislavovich, what do you think about that? To which extent I think that the work done before is really promising? And I will reserve a couple of questions for the clearinghouse later.
The Center of Social Development has done something so that an appropriate decree of the President be adopted, and many goals follow our proposals. I would like to turn primarily to the non-raw commodity export. It's an integrated indicator. It shows how efficient the country is. It was well defined. Now the budget-related maneuver, well, more focus should be given to human capital, education, the health sector, and also the lifespan should to be extended, with more focus being given to health promotion, including health disease prevention, healthy lifestyle, and going after to the remote remote check of human health. Inadequate focus has been given to education. Less funding has been given to education so far. As for the infrastructure, it also was taken into account. I'd like to mention also labor productivity, digital economy, and the tax maneuver in the oil sector, the pension reform. All of it is included. But I'd like to mention what has not been taken account of. We should primarily first start with the public governance reform. The quality of the regulatory environment and the related methods does not match the challenges either in precision of action or duplication. We haven't heard enough about the reform of surveillance and oversight, as has been proved with some numbers shown. It overloads, all of it overloads the business and also government institutions. They suffer as well. Accordingly, digitalization may accelerate public governance, and some functions should be reassembled. We need less such functions. Some duplications should be crossed out, in particular when we deal with information. There's another interesting point. Over the past decade, the share of the government in our economy has increased almost by 10%. Given our survey, rather an original research, from up to 39 to 40%, the share of government is taken now in the government. But the presidential state of nation says that the share of the government should be decreased in the economy, but we haven't heard any clear-cut action for that. As for the judicial reform, unfortunately, we have now a low confidence now. Of the proposals we have drafted, 30% have been announced, and they have gone to the parliament for hearings, but it's the smaller part. As for transparency and independence of the judicial system, we still have a proposal for that. The relegation or delegation of some functions to the regions, there should be more of those in the development and construction for this authority delegation. But I've mentioned only some points that have been reflected in the plan. But first of all, I'd like to say that the scale of the objectives facing us, in particular currently, given the aggregate of not always favorable conditions, and the rate of economic growth this year, well, probably 1.8% as expected, while globally it will be about 3.9%. In order to make this breakthrough to this higher growth rate, I'd like to support Mr. Silvanov here, that we should be guided by the economic growth. But in order to ensure this higher rate, while taking into account the negative demography, we'll have less and less able-bodied individuals in the country. Well, given that it's hard to build up the investment, we certainly are supportive of all the action plans, but I'd like to say that as recent as 6 years ago, the presidential decree mentioned 20 29% is the goal of GDP, but now it's only 22%. So this 25 objective is rather ambitious. The Center of Social Development said that we should give more stress to higher labor productivity. We should de-shackle all new innovations, and the competition should be incentivized, and the whole paradigm should be changed to be moved from the capitalist economy to a fairly private sector with more competition ensured. It will be a sharp turning with less government to be involved in the economy. So some time is needed in order to claim we should have such a breakthrough. I believe currently we are not well deploying in this direction, and confidence is rather low currently in investment. After the decision made by the government about the taxation policy that was discussed in the government and the State Duma, then the decision emerged about the seizure or the withdrawal of some income from private companies. This does not builds up confidence, by the way. But the government institutions, public institutions, they should be transparent, predictable in public governance. These institutions, unfortunately, are limpy. I'd like to break the consequence of it. Well, as for the super income, well, you know, it alerts us, of course. No, any seizure of surplus income will not take place. Never. Well, we would like to say, well, look, but the applausemen should have been heard here. But they are not businessmen. They don't clap. Well, but they are financiers anyway. Well, they probably will cry here with tears, vice versa. Well, however, we would like to draw more resources to the budget. What do we witness right now? It is some, of course, a revolutionary effect in the performance of the company. There is good results, and the income is now growing at a high rate, and the income tax has grown by 12% since early this year. But where do the companies invest? They invest more. They mostly pay dividends. Well, they are somewhat, they fear investment. Previously, everything was just exported. Now it's risky for them. So our mission currently, well, to help them. We agreed to set up a working group. Yeah, I announced that. You know, what did we lack in the past? We should support the companies, sit at the table face to face and say, guys, we as a government, we need the areas for investment, this and this, primarily the infrastructure. Well, you will secure quite a good outcome. And we will provide the support for this investment to provide public guarantees, subsidies, all the tools available with the government. And the companies will probably say, we would like to invest it here and there. Please help us with the infrastructure. And we'll do that. We shouldn't expect as a company has some resource, exports it, or pays as bonuses, dividends, and so on, and you'll get then nothing as a result for the economy. This is exactly the point in time when we should, hand in hand, agree and understand what the companies need, listen to them, and what the government needs. And this will be an absolutely marginal investment that would yield income not worse than to bank accounts or some securities. This is our task. Well, I'd like to make one more specification. Well, on behalf of the businessmen, I'm not a businessman, but they should applaud right now, I think. Yeah, there was some whisper in the rows. I'd like to specify one point, although there is a risk that we will be taken away somewhere, far away. You said about some improvement of public governance, but what is also required and has not come up, despite the 25 years of this reform, the changing the paradigm of public spirits, public moods. Normally, you are attributed to liberals, but you are rather a bizarre liberal. We have about 30% of liberals like latent socialists. Yes. By the way, when I discuss economy with them, for instance, judicial reform or private ownership, I vote with both hands for that, although as a moderator I might not say, but you know, they still discuss, you know, private own property, courts and so on, what is fair, what is not fair. Probably Alexander Pushkin, our greatest poet, said that I'm the only one European in this country, he said. maybe we should allow the government to do what it's doing now in the area as it is. If it's not the government, then the society, where only 2% are willing to do business, they are unable for such reform. Well, in one of my presentations, I said we're about to have about 6% of our population who are in business, but only 2% are willing to establish a new business. It's absolutely inadequate. Even in Eastern Europe, it's about 8 and more percent, with 30 and even more percent in the developing countries. In the emerging countries. Well, with this willingness to go for a risk, to establish a new business, to create an innovative product, not to be afraid to make errors, mistakes, with these 2% of willing going business, it's absolutely inadequate. It's a structural obstacle in a problem in our economy. I did not mention it among the points I listed before, that we are not well given account to in the plan. For the support of business, but the Chamber of Accounts, our reports of the Chamber of Accounts have shown recently that currently we have very little leverage for support of business. This paradigm is not being reversed, unfortunately, in relation to businessmen. Well, what Mr. Silovanov said about the support for investment tunes and moods, yeah, we are supportive for that indeed. But we understand that we need some oversight, surveillance, some regulation are redundant, sometimes licensing is overburdened. Or some standards be set for businessmen. Nothing is happening there for now. Even if when you are willing, you would like, and there is even an investment project fund. Well, there are so many obstacles in this way that your willingness, your desire is not sufficient for that. So these obstacles should be lifted. I'd like to remind you, in order to go to rise the European Union in oversight and surveillance, in regulation, this burden should be halved. Now the optimum load in the controls, it's not so unfriendly as before. In that sense, I would say that the public institutions are an integral thing for this new environment to be created. Yeah, well, yeah, I mentioned the audit of the mechanisms being applied. How about the Chamber of Accounts to operate in this year? As an oversight agency will certainly change as a watchdog. We would like to give more focus to the so-called strategic audit as part of the budget. That is to evaluate the effectiveness, the performance of our operations, and also the methods, techniques to be developed to evaluate such performance. What we call as a strategic audit, including the audit of national goals, national programs and projects. Government projects. One of the shortcomings right now of the current approach, the overall picture of public governments or national project management has not been well created. There are 9 national goals in the presidential decree. There are national projects. They are not always interrelated, and the completion of the current national project that have been prepared. They do not always reach the national goals in duration, in less poverty, in more investment companies, in innovative companies to be set up. The national projects are followed by the national programs. It's a rather sophisticated, ramified structure right now. And any uniformity, some connectivity should be reviewed, and I think the Chamber of Accounts will be the institution that will impartially evaluate the completion and performance of the national goals and objectives. Unfortunately, I would say that as for the implementation of the previous presidential decrees, rather ambitious, specifically 25 million jobs to be created, only 16 million have been created, but the respective methodology of measurement has changed twice. So we should be objective also in the measurement methods with regard to the statistics. We'll certainly perform this analysis, data analysis, assessment techniques, also as an independent auditor. Also, as for the labor productivity growth over the past 6 years, the presidential decree set the goal for 50% to be raised, but only 3.8% has been secured over the past 6 years in total, as accrual. We'll continue to be objective, I believe, I hope, as auditors. But we should shift the emphasis to drafting the proposals. At our Chamber of Accounts, we said in our strategy we would like to play rather as consultants and play as a partner with the government. As for the shortcomings, we'll still think how to do it better. Well, you've laid a good bridge from the Chamber of Accounts to the presidential decree. Now I'd like to ask Mr. Kudrin. Well, in these presentations, we have heard about major projects, labor productivity. We don't know where the balance, the stress on the balance will be. But could you play as a mediating these issues? Do you have sufficient competencies, capitalization, the regulatory skill? Alexei has just, Mr. Kudrin has just started the talk. I don't know, well, whether competencies are in sufficient supply. Overall, I would say that the banking sector is fairly competent in general, and it probably meets the global standards, both technologically and know-how, the respective products. You're right, you've touched upon two relevant subjects, small businesses and major investment projects. I do not think it's a matter of choice. These are two very important components. Complementary they are. We need the major investment projects and the smaller ones. A lot has been said here about that. Mr. Kudrin was right to say that the role of the government is very important here. Mr. Siluanov said, but it should play like a multiplier with regard to private businesses. The government should take on the most serious risks with regard to PPP, private-public partnership. Our VTB Bank has gained a quite positive experience with the road construction in St. Petersburg, Pulkovo Airport construction in St. Petersburg. We didn't have any money at that time from the government, but the government had taken some risks anyway, and we need it in the future as well, because otherwise, it will be very hard to complete major investment projects. But there are subtler tools to tune up these processes. Just one example. For instance, Russia does not have long money. Well, in fact, no country probably has long money. In some national banks, even in the industrial countries, when it comes to a 20 years project, they allow their banks to consider the 5-to-4 liquidity ratio. In our case, we have a gap in liquidity, and this some breach of the standard. With a normative rate, well, we do have this normative rate. But even if our major Russian banks are cut off from funding from Western banks, we do have adequate liquidity right now in order to ensure the required level of lending. And even if our lending growth is not currently that high, it does not result from the lacking liquidity. Well, everybody says what's more relevant to him. I'd like to know, well, may I guess what you want to say? So all of you prefer to have a comb nearby in order not to be a shaggy dog here? No, it's a closed subject. No, it's a different point. I cannot see today any risk to our financial system from any domestic problem. I've discussed with my colleagues today. We have stable macroeconomic indicators, including inflation, and the Central Bank of Russia. Well, its performance is evaluated as aggressive or otherwise in the bank's sanation. But we are happy that the central bank is quite resolute in taking steps, and the measures that have been taken, they show that the central bank enjoys quite a sizable resource and might in order to lift the obstacles, even serious obstacles that crop up. If we take all the domestic aspects, I am confident that the Russian banking sector is quite stable. It will be cleared further. I think it's a normal thing. We have 500 banks. It's still too many, I believe. Not all of those match the current standards. Not all of them perform properly, so they need controls over. And the macroeconomic policy of the government and the central bank's oversight will ensure the stability of the Russian banking sector. We have serious threats. Yes, everybody is aware of those. Everybody now on a waiting list, including the international community, with regard to geopolitics, new U.S. sanctions against the international banks. And many skeptics say you cannot counteroppose anything. I think if we ensure more security of our financial and banking sector, we'll never be able to create a sector that will be well protected from external risks. We have done something. We have established the mirror payment system. We have established quite a reliable platform for securities trading, the Moscow Stock Exchange, the repository center. But I think we should proceed further. It might take years or decades. But first, we should promote settlements in payments in Russian currency, not US dollars, in order to lower the risks from potential impact by the U.S. administration for political ends. I have a great proponent right now, Mr. Erdogan. But some say there's absolute mess there. What sort of with the lira in Turkey, but we still have yuan, we have ruble, we have yen. We should motivate our partners to go over to these currencies, and certainly it will incur extra costs.
Secondly, we should enhance the trends of transferring basic structure of the offshore holdings to the Russian jurisdiction. I know that the clients subjected to sanctions in April, they face hell of a lot of problems because they have been registered abroad, because the corporate management is just falling apart and the company is at risk. I wish the Russian companies were registered in Russia. For this, to make it happen, we make certain steps with special taxation regime. I mean, in the western part, the name Oktyabrski maybe is not the best one. It doesn't matter. And then transferring to the Russian jurisdiction all the bonds like SPV and the main depository, it is Clearstream, or we should develop the legal framework for this purpose. It will not be that simple. And the primary depositarium would be NRD, so that we could place the Russian securities under the Russian jurisdiction and using the Russian platforms. And fourthly, we should actively move the shares circulation to the Russian stock market. And Katarsk have acquired those at $500 million, and Azeri also did the same. So I think we should turn to more strict regulation when the central bank can impose strict conditions. What percentage of shares could be placed under depository obligations? And we should also develop the platforms in order to operate the hedging and because today this work cannot be done on the Russian market, and all this work is being done through the Western companies and banks, and they create quite a lot of risks for our banks and for our clients, and there could be unfriendly moves on the part of the United States or some other countries. And probably the last but not least, in its development of the centralized clearing of precious metals. So they are being developed to Zurich or London. So, and whether we shall be able to develop such a market of, let's say, accounts. And the last in this context, Trump says that we should do everything possible that is profitable for the United States. In the 1990s, we joined all the financial institutes like the World Bank, or European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. I'm not suggesting to abandon these bodies, but in those institutions, the Western experts prevail. And where the, let's say, stakeholders and shareholders, but they have actually stopped their operations in Russia. And I have some complaints regarding Basel III. So we signed some documents, let's say, when related to Basel III. According to this agreement, the major Russian banks, 10 of those, they should have capital 3% higher than any other bank. What is the price of the issue for the VTB bank, for instance, during 2017, 18, and 19? 450 billion rubles of capital. It means 4.5 trillions of credits and loans that were not issued in Russia. Of course, we should improve the capital bases. So say 5 state banks, they don't have access to the financial markets because of the sanctions imposed on Russia. So we should somehow modify this. Because the alternative would be boiled down to the reduction of the portfolios of the Russian banks. Maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. We should rethink our international obligations, to which extent they are really interesting for us and profitable for us. Because we are being attacked by tanks, but we're using long mowers to just resist this attack. So we should just copy Trump approach that whatever is profitable for the United States, it should be done. The same for Russia. So we're being prepared to develop this system both in big businesses and small and medium-sized businesses, and we should do our utmost just to protect our investors. Regretfully, we did not create it, but the April sanctions against our brothers, I mean major businessmen, this is not just a limitation of the activities, but this is just the strangling or suffocation of the Russian corporations, and this percent is on the rise. Thank you. So it's all but natural to give the floor to the representative of the World Bank. I'll do it in a while. But I would like to ask a question to Stanislav Sergeyevich, whatever Mr. Kostin has said. You know, breaking traffic rules, but does not rule out the existence of those rules. But with regard to the World Trade Organization, Trump says that they are going to leave the organization. But we were fighting to be a member of this organization for 20 years in a row. So sitting before the TV set, or you would read it through the internet. So let's say when you heard this news, Trump and the World Trade Organization, it was not a news. It was an emotional statement, after all. But this would change the deals with Canada, Mexico, NAFTA countries, trading with Europe, with China. It's a part of a major discussion whether Russia should abandon the World Trade Organization. But we shall have negative consequences because Russia is the member of EUROZES, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan as well. It was the first one to join, leaving the World Trade Organization. So we shall not gain anything. We shall just lose. And from the viewpoint of import, we shall not have any limitations. If we reconsider the trade policy, we should reconsider our relationship, interrelations with our neighbors. And so this is the way to nowhere. But bearing in mind that many World Trade Organization countries, they don't stick to the rules every time. But when it comes to defending the Russian interests, the mechanism of the WTO, it should certainly be interesting for Russia and make contribution to defending Russian interests. So Basel is a nice city, but Basel III is a terrible thing. What can be done about it? Because we're attending the financial forum, so the Bank of Russia is one of the executing agency here. But under the current conditions, I don't think that we should be ahead of the globe as a whole, because around Russia, around our banks, so there was a decision made to limit our activities. Probably together, hand in hand with the central bank, we should revisit the issue and think twice. So we have already discussed the issue with the management of the central bank, and I think it's high time to make a decision. And in totality, the logic that was already voiced is pretty clear. And we do need some credits, some loans, some investments, but if we limit ourselves, so we cannot get the in-country investors, not by means of more strict regulation. On the contrary, we should ease this regulation burden and in every possible way, in all the directions, because we should not blindly follow these kind of requirements placed by Basel, and including the emerging economies or developing countries. Not all the norms and regulations are adhered to by all the countries without exception. So that's why we have to rethink it over. Kristalina Georgievna represents the World Bank. So, on the contrary, she has a very interesting and useful experience regarding the investment into infrastructure. I mean, developing countries, sometimes these are the problems for the developed countries. Yesterday, I visited one of the regions, and they opened up a new highway. Why business should invest in something that is not its mainstreaming activity? Regarding private-public partnerships, the people would bring human settlements, and they do need roads. So these examples are not that common in Russia. What Russia can borrow from the global experience? Let's talk about financing of the infrastructure. It has been already referred to in the statements already made. What kind of good piece of advice you would share with us? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for this kind invitation that you invited the World Bank to attend this forum. And the weather itself says bully for you guys. But the weather is not subjected to sanctions. Well, it's another pair of shoes, but nevertheless, starting from the following. You know, the World Bank is attending this forum because, you know, it helps us a lot to work in other countries. We learn a lot, let's say, including the infrastructure development. So there are three very important things for this kind of discussion. First and foremost, we just observe the macroeconomic conditions in Russia. It's pretty high, but the economic growth it's not that high. By emphasizing our attention how to improve the economic growth rates in Russia, it means that we should emphasize our attention on two things. First, human capital. The first, it has been already mentioned, and secondly, it's the infrastructure of a huge country. As far as this issue is concerned, so there is some experience gained in Russia regarding PPP. Take St. Petersburg airport was already built there, and there is a ring road or a circular road. So it was built on the PPP money, and it's a very successful project. Why it was that successful? You know, because in the first place, the project itself, it has been well developed, well done, and there was a transparent tender, and according to due diligence rules. And on the part of St. Petersburg itself, in the process of this project implementation, there was a very detailed analysis. In Russia, there is an ample experience of public-private partnership. So this experience should not be put to oblivion. It should be further spread. And secondly, you know, in the World Bank, we try to assess that there is a need for infrastructure, no matter the countries. Let's say $5 to $7 trillion should be there. It's a public financing. You know, it's not even very close to these trillions. It's far from this. It means that we should mobilize private financing and make it, and we should mobilize private financing, and it should be backbone of the public policy regarding the infrastructure, not just in this country, in Russia, but also elsewhere in the world. And thirdly, you were asking us, what do we know? What really works and what fails to work? Alexei Kudrin has already mentioned about it. Word is pretty simple. It's the trust. So the investor has confidence with the government, with the state, that this project will be would provide proper return on investment. And secondly, the investor is not going to say a lie. Let's say once the money is in his pocket, it means they are not there anymore. But the government itself, I think they should think about the project in terms of long-term, let's say the program that covers the period 2024. This is a short horizon, but the constitution itself is as such. So we should think much ahead. Secondly, speaking about the public institutes, it's not a simple thing. Some places it has been done properly. Say in Chile, in South Africa. So if we would like to use the experience and introduce them in this country, so this is what Russia has already done, comme il faut. So one could be proud of it, and we can replicate it. And we could also use the experience in those countries where public-private financing is done on a greater scale. And one can really feel it. So I would like to postpone this question a bit later, but I prefer to ask it right away. You know, I visit these places more or less often. I remember my visit to Chile back in 1993 when they said it was an economic, miracle. But I know historically Argentina and Uruguay, but I was visiting Chile for the first time in that year. I would come close to the presidential palace, La Moneda. It's an economic miracle. And I would like somebody to take a picture of me. And only the 20th pedestrian could take picture of me, but everybody would hear this economic miracle, but nobody has the camera. People do not know how to use it. Since those days, many things have changed. They have cameras and iPhones, whatnot, but I would say, but there was a kind of a myth in those days about Chile. And probably the second question I would like to say, maybe it's more political than something else. So, there are countries that have been successful in terms of economic growth, but nevertheless, they would never provide for the greater wealth or well-being of the population. So what about the subject matters of the World Bank? What is lacking? Let's say, in order to decrease the inequities and, let's say, manifestation of such a common feature like poverty in the developing countries. What's your stand on that?
I was in Chile during the great earthquake. If it did take place, if it had it taken place when you were taking your picture there, probably the whole city would have disappeared. It was the third hardest earthquake in the history of the humanity. And nothing was destroyed there. Seriously, why? Because the country took on the responsibility to strengthen their public institutions, but without the government interfering with the private sector, which operates better than the government. So Chile is not there anymore when you were there. Yeah, I understand. They have made a stride. They have survived themselves. As for poverty, what has been done in Russia indeed is impressive. Over the past 15 years, the country has raised a sizable part of the population who in the 1990s were in dire straits. All the Russians can be proud of that. However, we saw that the financial crisis of 2008 changed the trend in poverty reduction. In 2012, poverty was the level of 10–11%. Now it's a bit higher, about 13%. It means that 19 million Russians, what we are discussing here, all of that will be important to their life only when it will boil down to the improved living standard. The goal of the government is to cut down poverty by 50%. So there's 19 million to be down to 10 to 9 million by 2024. There's a question: how can it be done? If we rely only to a higher economic growth, higher than 4% per year, that will be great. But the government's expectations now are at the level of 3%. Does it mean we can say, sorry, we are unable to do that? No, it does not mean that. What is feasible to improve purposefully the use, the spending, public spending, so that the monies should go where there is a gap in the living standard, be where it is significant. Very little spending on fighting poverty, but if high focus is given to whom are we helping, it will be just enough so that that this goal of Russia be implemented. I personally believe it will come true. I'm looking at the finance minister. He's saying yes, right? Well, silence is a sign of consent. Dear friends, our audience has very punctual in coming together today. We were a bit late with the start. Theoretically, we were supposed to wrap up at 5 p.m. I'd like to suggest that since we started 10 minutes later, we can work till 10 to 6 p.m. Well, following what Kristalina Georgieva said, if we evaluate the budgetary spending, and particularly in looking for the resources that are required to fight against property or whatever, what budgetary spending areas are least efficient? I'd like to be supportive of Kristalina. Indeed, the goals on poverty reduction must be implemented. This is a national goal mentioned in the presidential decree. I think all of us are aware it must be done. For now, though, the projects are being shaped. We don't have any standalone project for that. But this is going to be discussed in the respective projects. Hopefully, it will be completed. But as for the reserves and resources, the Chamber of Accounts can envision some reserves. But what I mentioned in some interviews is public procurement primarily, what needs more focus. And as for regulation, regulation has been shifted to the finance ministry. But similar to the law number 44, there are 133 bylaws that unfortunately make a bit more vague the envisionment for the four ministries: Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economic Development. Last year they had provided 1,000 explanations, disclosures, how to participate in public procurement, which is not fairly transparent. We have not well learned how to regulate and to track prices in a quality way, because at some ministries and government agencies, procurement prices are much higher for similar products. 20% of all the procurement made goes to some single supplier without any tender, just as decided by the government. And in the market sectors, sometimes the contracts are given over to private companies, but not under market conditions. I apologize that I have interrupted you. During the first 2 minutes, you sort of voted in your words for deregulations. Now you are probably more inclined to regulation. Where are you? Right. Regulation. We need a simplified regulation. The system is a bit too ramified now, but the regulatory model should allow to make the market story more competitive. As for Law 225, that is public corporations procurement that have trillions and trillions of places. 30% are placed as outside tenders to one single supplier. We think there's a lot of work to be done there. There's another area, public investment. Currently, in 2016, as for the targeted investment program, 488 facilities were to be commissioned. So 35% have not been commissioned, while all the resources had been provided. But if we look more to the past, currently we have 2.29, almost 3,000 projects are now under construction. 2,000 projects have been suspended, so the funds already allocated were frozen. 2,300 facilities have been completed, but the titles have not been formalized. In some cases, they are under operation, others just idle, although they have been commissioned, but the titles have not been formalized. As for more than 2,000 facilities project, we don't have any information at all, although they're complete. So it's just an example that if you take just this single area, we need to sort it out quite well. Maxim Oreshkin also attended our meeting, and he said that he would like to arrange more things in order, more online information to be provided, all the facilities under construction, quality of construction, and all the procurement in this area. I mentioned only one area, but there are many such where we need more focus. I would also mention another factor mentioned by Kristalina. Public confidence. We have more public confidence when there is transparency and feedback. Transparency plus confidence are a matter of principle. There is connection. But unfortunately, our public confidence is inadequate now. And the Chamber of Accounts set up another goal that we should become. It should become an institution to secure more data transparency in this country, and we have some certain authority to demand that when our auditors know that this data is supposed to be disclosed and the information system be operated, is it codified in law? Yes, some authority is available. So many of our checks and audits will include also this requirement for more data transparency. Using it on the relevant website in a dialogue with the community. I think if all this work is well arranged with the respective policy, more confidence will get. Also, with regard to the explanations of our errors, the sequence of our steps, this feedback through transparency is one of the potential resources of our government. I'd like to say that my paradigm changed significantly with the humanitarian projects. Some would like just I would prefer to pay a penalty and then appeal to the Federal Treasury, because the reporting procedure was suggested so that in a year I was called up to the Prosecutor General's office. Yes. I'm not lobbying for anything. I've completed it well without public money with this humanitarian project. But that was my recent experience. You've just demonstrated your confidence with the government, right? Yes. Well, first I'd like to say that Mr. Kudrin, where he is currently, it means we'll have more transparency since he is here with us. There will be more focus on budgeting based on performance. I'm very happy with the Russians that Mr. Kudrin is now where he should be for them. I like to say, using this opportunity as a lady, to take the floor for the next time, I hope indeed that Russia does not reject its very important role in the global community. One subject was discussed that Russia probably should depart from this, from WTO, and also probably such international institutions are not required for Russia. No, I believe that the future of Russia depends how the relationship of Russia with its regions and the role of Russia globally. Honestly, I'm confident that the world will continue to develop to a joint solution of complicated issues. The world is more fragile currently than previously. We need each other. There should be an element of optimism. When I was flying from Washington to Moscow, I read on the way an interesting public survey in the United States. What do the U.S. people think about international trade? I don't know whether you've seen it or not. How do you think? The majority of U.S. people believe that international trade, is it good or bad? Those who think the majority think it's good, raise your hands. Well, if the US people voted for Trump, they probably distrust international trade. Well, that was at that time. Now the most recent public survey said, I couldn't trust my eyes. 82% of the US people believe that international trade is good for the economy. 85% say it's good only for consumers. 67% think it's good to create more jobs. The hope should be always with you. This is the public opinion. This is not what we think about it. Kristalin, transfer the World Bank's headquarters to Moscow. Yeah, it will be safer for all of us. I think that, well, the future, we can never predict what the future will be. But it's good that the World Bank speaks Russian. That's the thing, which is great. Let us wrap up, please, only by one question to our both ministers. Please, you. Indeed, we mentioned SMEs only here in this panel, but we have not addressed this question to you. With the economic action plan being developed by the government right now, what's the place and role there of SMBs? Well, that is the core. The SMBs is the core of our economy. It will ensure more flexibility, sustainability, resistance to potential shocks. What Mr. Kundrin said, that the Chamber of Accounts conducted a study on SMBs, and absolutely agree with the conclusions provided there. The Chamber of Accounts analyzed 2016 and early 2017 when I was visiting the ministry. Well, we looked at those conclusions and the data. There were specific subsidies to be provided to businessmen. But there were many corruption risks that we have removed right now, and the new national project was being drafted. Is based on new principles. It's aimed to resolve the issue with the people who would like, with a number of people who would like to become businessmen. As soon as you become a businessman, you're supposed to be in the appropriate financial environment for more opportunities. We need certainly quite efficient tools for this business to grow from small ones to become mid-sized businesses, to go into higher. To a high scale. Of course, it's important to secure financing. We are drafting now a new program. Next year, more than 1 trillion of loans in rubles will be provided at a lower interest rate. It will be a large-scale project. Clearly, I'd like to repeat what I started with, SMBs. It's a prerequisite of sustainability, of our search for new niches in the market, and for the entire dynamics of the Russian economy. Well, but as soon as we come up to a large-size business, well, I used to work as a loader. We were making a film in the Pulkovo airport. No, I thought there were problems with the cargo there when we were working there as a loader. No, it's fine. Yeah, I mastered some professions there that emerged as sequences of the Petersburg Economic Forum. But it's good with Pulkovo. We have some projects now in hand. They were commercial projects. They were not sustainable. Still, budget financing was required. How can we avoid that if you are defining now the action plans, and they were mentioned by Maxim Oreshkin? Well, many people say we don't have money in Russia. We have few well-thought-out projects, well-calculated. We are maintaining a whole team for that. Some of them even are stationed in London for various reasons. But we shouldn't be greedy, you know. We should use the well-thought-out projects that were invested by the World Bank and the EBRD. They should be well worded and well thought out. If we violate all these principles, and if for various reasons, the government may demand something, then we should use public support, subsidies, and go for that with open eyes. But not saying, you know, first we get money, and then we'll try to sort it out later, all that garbage, it will be too late. We should approach it properly. We can build airports in this country without budgetary support. All those can secure payback easily. But in this case, it's an absolute commercial element. It does not mean, though, I believe, that we should not build at the expense of the government roads, bridges. So, of course, all the infrastructure cannot be built. The people will not tolerate that. So it should be combined. The government should build free roads. We should build paid roads, tolled roads. We have financing for that and good expertise. My last question, please. Well, we're about to wrap up. Please evaluate what we have heard here. Assess the risks. Probably we will have postponed our growth rate due to what's happening at the external markets. It's not only a matter of sanctions, but the entire sustainability. Well, due to some recent giants, if you take Argentina, Brazil, Turkey, we have the same sustainability problems. I tried to define questions. You've been listening to this question. So how do you evaluate all this result of this discussion? I've just heard that the VTB is willing to take on some business burden to build airports. It's very important. Well, we reported to the chairman of the council, to you, in fact. This is part of our national project. It's very essential that we have an investor for the airport infrastructure, in particular in the Far East of Russia. As for the agenda, we're not changing it, no. We said earlier that despite all the sanctions, restrictions, we should vice versa liberalize our agenda and create proper conditions for the business. Well, some rules of the game are changing, or rather the lack of some rules. While previously we did discuss the G20, the national IMF venues, now it's vice versa. At that time, we thought about raising all these restrictions, lifting all the restrictions. Now we have them around. The dollar was a settlement unit, a payment unit. We didn't have any. Now we are switching to national currencies. Trade restrictions are being imposed. Also, later we'll have probably those on capital flows. So there's no predictability now. No rules of the game that have been generated for years. In this context, well, if a caravan is walking its way, you shouldn't turn around and spiking the wheels. We should ignore all that. We have our own agenda on hand. We should more intensively, more proactively implement it. So we have some breakthrough objectives for the coming 6 years. And we'll do our best with using all the tools to implement this agenda, regulations, incentives.
Well, thanks very much. I thank all the participants and the audience for well done work.